Karen threw her gum at the guard and burst into laughter, but the crowd gasped. A minute later, she was pinned to the pavement, her screams of "let me go" drowned out by applause. How did she end up like this? London was suffocating in the summer heat, and the sun mercilessly scorched the stone pavement in front of Buckingham Palace. The air was thick with the scent of hot asphalt, mingling with the aromas of tourist hot dogs and sugary soda. Crowds of people flocked to the famous guards, lined up in perfect formation before the Golden Gates. Their scarlet uniforms were impeccably pressed, and their bearskin hats looked even more imposing under the blazing sun. Among the tourists, one person stood out in particular: Karen. A woman of about 45, with short blonde hair carelessly tied into a tiny ponytail. Sweat beaded on her forehead, dripping down her plump cheeks. Her tight black leggings and pink t-shirt with the words "Queen of Drama" awkwardly outlined her large frame. Arms crossed over her chest, chin raised. She had the smug look of someone who expected to be the center of attention at any moment. Karen, used to being the star of any situation, spotted the motionless guard and grinned widely. "Oh my God, he's like a robot!" she exclaimed in exaggerated horror, jabbing a pudgy finger in his direction. Her voice sliced through the crowd's hum, drawing glances from nearby tourists. A few chuckled, sensing an impending spectacle. The guard, a fair-skinned young man in his mid-20s with sharp, chiseled features, did not move. His posture was flawless, gaze fixed straight ahead, the sunlight reflecting subtly off his stoic expression. He had seen Karen's type before. He knew exactly what was coming. Bored tourists who found the ceremony dull always craved entertainment, and Karen was ready to give them a show. She took an awkward dance step in front of the guard, twirled dramatically, flailing her arms in the air like a clumsy ballerina. "Come on, Mr. Robot, give me a little smile," she sang, striking a ridiculous pose. The crowd giggled. The guard didn't move an inch. Karen wasn't done. She stepped closer, almost pressing up against him, tilting her head to the side as she studied his face. "Dude, do you even breathe?" Nothing. Then a brilliant idea struck her. She squinted, thoughtfully chewing her gum, feeling it stick to her teeth. Then, slowly, she pulled it out of her mouth with 2 fingers. The crowd watched closely. "All right, let's see how much of a robot you really are." With a dramatic swing of her arm, she flung the pink gum straight at the guard. The crowd gasped. A loud, sticky plop. The gum landed on the pristine red wool of his uniform. Silence fell over the scene. Tourists froze as if someone had pressed pause on the world. A few uneasy chuckles surfaced, but died quickly as people noticed the guard's face. Karen, oblivious to the severity of what she'd just done, threw her head back in loud, shrieking laughter. "Whoops! Guess you can't do anything, huh?" Her voice echoed between the palace walls and the hushed crowd, sending a ripple of discomfort through the onlookers. But then, something changed. The guard didn't move, but the air around him did. His jaw tightened. The fingers gripping his rifle flexed slightly forward. The crowd felt it. Something was about to happen. The crowd stirred. People whispered, glanced at each other, muttered under their breath. Some quickly pulled out their phones to start recording. Others just stood still, lips pressed together, watching. Their faces were a mix of unease and anticipation. Some tried not to look at all, as if afraid that interfering would make them part of this uncomfortable scene. But Karen noticed none of it. She was still laughing, head thrown back, her loud, high-pitched cackle grating on the ears of those around her. The gum stuck to the perfectly pressed uniform, a small pink stain against the pristine red fabric. A humiliation. "I thought you British people had some sense of humor," Karen cackled, throwing her arms wide. "Come on, smile for the camera." A few tourists chuckled nervously, but most remained silent. The laughter was hesitant, brief. No one was sure if they should be laughing at all. The spectacle wasn't funny anymore. The guard still didn't move, but his gaze had changed. He wasn't staring past Karen anymore. His eyes were locked on her now, boring into her with an icy, silent contempt. He wasn't angry. He showed no emotion at all. But his silence, it was deafening. The crowd held its breath. Karen didn't feel it. She was enjoying herself. She thought she was the star of the show, that all eyes were on her for the right reasons. She had cracked the uptight Brit. She had won. Then, thud. Heavy boots on pavement. Loud. Unstoppable. Karen froze, the smug expression slipping from her face. A man in a black uniform emerged from behind the guard. Tall, muscular. His face was calm, but his eyes, they belonged to someone who was born to restore order. He stopped directly in front of Karen, just within arm's reach. His black gloves creaked slightly as he flexed his fingers. "Ma'am, you need to leave. Now." His voice was quiet, but it was an order. Karen blinked. "Wait, what? What do you mean?" She let out a nervous chuckle, glancing quickly at the crowd. She expected laughter, support, but she found only silence. People were waiting, watching. Something twisted unpleasantly in her stomach. She wasn't used to this. Usually, when she made a scene, people either laughed along or ignored her. But now she was alone. No applause, no validation. The man in black didn't move. "You assaulted a royal guard. That is an offense. If you do not leave immediately, you will be detained." Karen's breath hitched. This wasn't part of the script. Where was the joke? The chuckles? The crowd wasn't on her side, and that infuriated her. "Are you serious?" she snapped, stepping forward, puffing out her chest. "It's just gum, for God's sake. Do you people even know what a joke is?" But her voice wavered. And then, applause. At first, just a few claps. Then louder. People weren't cheering for her. They were clapping for the guard. Karen's face drained of color. She had expected cheers in her name. Instead, she was being celebrated against. Her breath quickened. "This is ridiculous. It's just a joke." But the joke was over. All she could hear now was the sound of strangers clapping, not for her, but for her downfall. "Are you serious? I'm an American citizen. You can't treat me like this!" Karen roared, her face turning a furious shade of red, burning from both rage and the scorching heat. The veins on her neck bulged, her eyes blazed with fury, and her chest rose and fell with heavy, furious breaths. She couldn't believe it. Her, a real American. Being humiliated like this, in front of the entire crowd by these stuck-up Brits. The security officer stood in front of her, tall, muscular, his expression cold and unreadable. He didn't flinch. He didn't react to her outburst, and that only made her angrier. "You have 5 seconds to step back, or we will remove you from the premises." His voice was calm, steady, but unshakable. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. And that was what made it terrifying. Karen suddenly understood. He was absolutely serious. The crowd stirred. Some tourists, long tired of the scene, began chanting, "Out! Out! Out!" First it was one voice, then another, and another. Within seconds, dozens of voices merged into a deafening, merciless chant. The sound pounded in Karen's ears, making her clench her fists even tighter. Every fiber of her being rejected this humiliation. "I am not going anywhere. This is public property. You can't touch me." Her voice shook with rage as she waved her arms, trying to shout over the crowd. But they weren't listening anymore. They weren't on her side. Their faces were filled with disdain. The chants grew louder, stronger, overwhelming. It was suffocating her, pushing her into a corner. Her entire body burned with fury. Were they laughing at her? Did they really think she would just leave? That she would accept defeat like a beaten dog? Never. Her fists clenched. She was not going to lose. Her mind boiled with emotions, rage, humiliation, a burning need to make them shut up. And then, she made the biggest mistake of her life. Gritting her teeth, she lunged forward, and with all her strength, shoved the officer in the chest. For a moment, time froze. The crowd gasped. People stopped breathing. The sound of her hands slamming against his chest echoed across the square. But the officer didn't move. Not an inch. Karen's breath caught in her throat. Her hand was still outstretched, but suddenly she wasn't so sure what had just happened. She had expected him to stumble, to react, but he didn't even flinch. He just stood there, like a stone wall. The crowd held its breath, waiting for his response. The officer exhaled slowly, as if trying to contain his irritation. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even offended. If anything, he looked tired. He casually adjusted his uniform, smoothing out the spot where her hands had landed. A chill ran down Karen's spine. And then, "All right, that's it." His voice was just as calm, but this time, it carried a sense of finality. Before she could even process what happened, 2 seconds later, her face was slammed against the scorching stone pavement. Her body felt weightless. Her arms were yanked behind her back. Her breath hitched. A sharp pain shot through her wrists. "Let me go! I'll sue you!" Her shriek echoed through the square. But this time, it wasn't the triumphant cry of a woman in control. It was the desperate scream of a cornered animal. The crowd erupted in applause. "That's what you get. Finally! Hope she gets banned from the UK." Phones were everywhere. Cameras captured everything. Her twisted, furious, horrified face, her arms restrained by the officer, the royal guard standing perfectly still. He didn't look at her. He didn't react. He didn't give her the satisfaction of a response. And that was her ultimate defeat. It had only been an hour, but the internet had already exploded. Videos titled "American Karen Gets Owned by Royal Guard" were spreading at lightning speed, filling social media, messaging apps, and news websites. Across the world, people watched as an entitled American tourist got her instant karma, humiliated in front of hundreds. On Reddit, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook, the clip was everywhere. There were slow-motion replays of the moment Karen was slammed into the pavement, reaction videos, memes. The comments were merciless. This is why people hate tourists. Justice served. She thought she was untouchable. Reality check complete. This woman just learned the hard way that the Queen's Guard ain't playing. I swear, Karens are an international problem now. Some internet sleuths found her social media. Her latest posts, family pictures, motivational quotes, were now flooded with brutal replies. "Oh, look. It's the lady who got humiliated in London. How does it feel to be famous? I bet she's going to try to sue the UK now." Karen had become famous, but for all the wrong reasons. Instead of likes, followers, and admiration, she was met with total humiliation. Her name became a meme. GIFs of her being slammed down appeared in thousands of group chats. TikTokers reenacted her meltdown, adding ridiculous sound effects to her screaming. Karen sat in her hotel room, nervously scrolling through her phone. Every second brought more notifications. Not one of them was positive. "This can't be happening," she muttered, gripping her phone with trembling hands. But it was. And the Royal Guard? The man she had tried to humiliate? He never said a word. He gave no interviews. He made no comments. He simply walked away. And that was the greatest revenge of all. He left her to fight, not him. but her own disgrace. Karen had wanted attention, and she got it, just not the way she dreamed.